My Mother's Dirty Diary: How Julia Made Her Toxic Parents Famous for All the Wrong Reasons. Julia's mother died with her reputation intact. A perfect mother, a loving wife, and a pillar of the community. But behind closed doors, Julia had lived under her mother's iron rule, forced to smile for family portraits while enduring years of emotional manipulation. She thought she knew the full extent of her pain, until she found the diary. Hidden beneath floorboards, it revealed shocking truths: affairs, fraud, and a twisted obsession with control. Her mother's lies didn't die with her. In fact, they were just about to go viral. Everyone has secrets. But what if those secrets belonged to toxic parents who spent their lives pretending to be saints? Julia didn't stay silent, and neither should you. Comment below if you believe truth deserves to be heard. Julia Cooper was raised in a house where reputation came first and reality came second. From the outside, her family looked picture perfect. Her father sat on the local city council, and her mother, Lorraine Cooper, was adored as the heart of the neighborhood, known for charity galas, church events, and mentoring young mothers. But inside the four-bedroom colonial home, Julia wasn't living a dream. She was surviving a performance. From a young age, she was forced into roles: the obedient daughter, the smiling girl in piano recitals, the polite teen who never talked back. Her outfits were chosen for her speech rehearsed before dinner parties, and her emotions dismissed the moment they threatened the family's image. Lorraine wasn't physically abusive, but she was emotionally relentless. Julia's every move was judged. Crying was weakness, anger was disrespect, independence, dangerous. Whenever Julia tried to express herself, Lorraine would tighten her grip with toxic mantras like, "You don't want people to think we raised a selfish child, do you? After everything we do for you, you owe us at least a little grace." Her father, Gerald, was distant, quiet but complicit. He rarely intervened, choosing instead to let Lorraine handle things. His only priority was keeping their public image untarnished. His silence often felt louder than any scream. As a teenager, Julia tried to rebel in small ways: a haircut, a skipped youth group, a refusal to wear the family color-coded outfits for a holiday photo. But Lorraine always pulled her back in, sometimes with guilt, sometimes with rage. And when Julia earned a scholarship to an art school out of state, Lorraine fought tooth and nail to stop her from going, declaring, "I didn't spend 18 years raising you to throw your future away on painting." Eventually, Julia compromised. She stayed in state, took graphic design instead of fine arts, and came home every weekend like clockwork. And yet, no matter what she did, she always felt like a prisoner in her mother's perfect illusion. Over time, she learned to suppress her truth, to nod and smile, to survive. She watched as her mother was praised endlessly, featured in local magazines, given awards, and called a model mother. Meanwhile, Julia was quietly losing pieces of herself. Then, everything changed. Lorraine was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in early spring. It was sudden and cruel. Within 5 months, she was gone. Her funeral was a spectacle: flowers flown in, local officials attending, a full-page obituary calling her a beacon of selfless love. Julia stood at the podium, giving a eulogy written mostly by her father, choking back the truth. But the real turning point came weeks later, when Julia returned to the house to help sort through Lorraine's belongings. She had no interest in keeping much, just wanted it done. Until she stumbled across something strange. A floorboard in her mother's walk-in closet shifted under her step. Curious, Julia pried it up, revealing a small locked metal box. Inside it, a leather-bound diary with her mother's name pressed in gold on the cover. Pages filled with her delicate cursive, spanning over 15 years. What Julia read over the next few days would upend everything she thought she knew, not just about her mother, but her entire family. The diary contained affairs with 2 men, one of them a local pastor; financial fraud, including siphoning funds from the community charity Lorraine helped run. Cruel reflections on friends and even her own daughter, calling Julia too weak, too emotional, and a threat to our brand. Manipulation strategies Lorraine used to control Gerald and isolate Julia from outside influences. Lorraine had treated life like a PR campaign, branding her family like a business. The diary wasn't just a private confession. It was a blueprint of deceit, page after page of chilling self-awareness. Julia's first instinct was disbelief, then heartbreak, and finally, rage. Because for years, she had been told she was the problem, that she was ungrateful, dramatic, unstable. But now, she had proof that the mask wasn't just cracked, it was a full-blown lie. And in that moment, Julia knew one thing. Her mother's legacy would not remain untouchable. She wasn't going to burn the diary. She was going to publish it. Julia spent 3 days alone with her mother's diary, 3 long, sleepless nights where every page sank deeper into her chest like a knife. She read every entry, from Lorraine's cruel critiques of Julia's childhood drawings to the clinical way she described sabotaging her friend's marriage just to feel powerful again. There was no remorse in those pages, no regret, just a disturbing pride in the lies Lorraine had orchestrated and a twisted satisfaction in how easily people believed them. But it wasn't until Julia reached the final section of the diary that her numbness shattered into fire. In one entry, dated 2 years before Lorraine's death, she wrote, "Julia still thinks she's hurting me by distancing herself, but really, she's just proving why I never wanted a daughter in the first place. She's weak, and if I have to destroy her to protect this family's name, so be it." Julia froze. She reread the line over and over until her hands shook and her vision blurred. Destroy her? Her mother hadn't just disapproved of her. She had planned to erase her if she ever became a threat. It was no longer about painful parenting or perfectionism. It was intentional cruelty. This was abuse disguised in pearls and charity work. And suddenly, every manipulated moment of her life came into full focus. The guilt trips, the isolation, the cold stares when Julia didn't smile wide enough, the whispers to relatives about her being unwell, even her father's quiet avoidance. It all made sense now. Lorraine had built a castle of lies, and Julia had been locked in the tower. But no more. The final straw came during a family dinner held 2 weeks after the funeral, a gathering that was supposed to be for healing, organized by her father and Lorraine's sister, Aunt Denise. Julia sat across the table from her father, who was back to smiling for the cameras, preparing a speech about continuing Lorraine's charitable legacy. Julia tried to speak, to question whether anyone knew about the diary, but Denise quickly cut her off with a tight-lipped warning smile. "Now isn't the time for that, sweetheart. Let's honor your mother properly." That was it. Julia pushed her chair back without a word and left. Not just the room, the house. She packed a small suitcase, grabbed her laptop, the diary, and her old hard drive, then checked into a cheap motel 2 towns away. That night, she scanned every page of the diary and saved it into an encrypted PDF. Then she opened a blank document titled, "The Truth About Lorraine Cooper, A Daughter's Account." Julia was done being silenced. She realized something that night. Her entire life had been stolen for a fake story, and now she had the chance to rewrite the narrative. She didn't want revenge through violence or chaos. She didn't want to scream or burn everything down. No. She wanted the truth to become louder than the lies. She researched whistleblower protections. She looked up investigative journalists who covered community corruption and abuse hidden behind perfect families. She contacted 3 major publications anonymously. One replied within 24 hours, intrigued. The reporter, a woman named Mallory, had exposed political fraud rings before. She was blunt, sharp, and didn't hesitate when Julia told her. "My mother was a beloved figure, but I have the proof she wasn't who people think she was." Julia sent over the PDF, carefully redacted to protect identities not involved. She explained how the money from Lorraine's charity fund was misused, how donations were filtered into a private event account Lorraine used for luxury expenses. She described the controlling behavior she endured, how she was isolated, emotionally manipulated, and portrayed as unstable if she ever rebelled. She provided family emails, texts, even audio recordings of her mother's passive-aggressive lectures. Mallory's reaction was simple. Julia, this is going to explode. And Julia didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid anymore. Because in that moment she had taken her first real breath as herself. Not Lorraine's daughter, not the town's perfect girl, but Julia Cooper, the girl who lived through hell and came back with the receipts. She knew this wouldn't just shake her family. It would ripple through the entire town. Her father, the local councilman who turned a blind eye to years of manipulation, was mentioned in several diary entries. Most damning of all, one in which Lorraine bragged about convincing him to approve a zoning deal in exchange for political favors from local donors. Julia now held the power, not out of vengeance alone, but out of justice. That night, she stood by the window of the motel, watching rain smear down the glass, clutching the USB drive containing everything. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She felt ready. Julia didn't just want to expose the truth. She wanted to destroy the lie her mother had spent a lifetime building. And that meant strategy, not just rage. She knew the diary itself was damning, but she couldn't just dump it on social media and expect people to believe her. Lorraine Cooper had been loved, idolized, and worshipped by their town. No one would believe her daughter over the saint they had buried with tears and roses. So Julia decided to let the town hear Lorraine in her own words. With Mallory's help, Julia had the diary authenticated by a forensic handwriting analyst. It was expensive, money Julia didn't really have, but it was necessary. The report confirmed that the diary was 100% legitimate. Then came the media preparation. Mallory advised Julia to split the story into 3 phases. 1. Initial tease. Grab attention with a few shocking but verifiable quotes from the diary. 2. Financial scandal. Reveal the charity fraud, backed by bank records and financial documents. 3. Personal impact. Share Julia's own emotional journey, anchoring the abstract crimes in a human story. It had to be slow and surgical, not a scream, but a scalpel. Because Julia didn't just want attention, she wanted belief, she wanted consequence, she wanted legacy reversal. The first step was building an online archive, the Lorraine Cooper Files, a clean, minimalist website with 3 main sections. In her own words, selected scans from the diary with exact quotes. The paper trail, financial documents, expense reports, screenshots. The daughter's voice, Julia's testimony, told in her own voice, with subtle, raw narration. She designed everything herself, sleek, modern, impossible to ignore. Each image loaded with weight, each quote framed for impact. A daughter is only useful as long as she stays silent. Lorraine Cooper, May 12, 2020. Meanwhile, Julia also created a burner email and scheduled an anonymous tip to the town's local newspaper, the Hollingsworth Herald, attaching 3 redacted pages from the diary and the title line, "Is your hometown hero still a hero after you read this?" Within 48 hours, the editor emailed back, demanding an interview. Julia declined. She wanted the story to grow without her face attached, at least for now. But she was far from hiding. She printed copies of diary pages and mailed them to members of the city council, where her father still sat in office. She didn't sign her name, just a typed note. Your colleague Gerald Cooper knew about this, read and asked why he never said a word. Then she timed the real blow. Mallory's publication, a national outlet, published their exclusive feature titled "The Diary of a Perfect Mother, a Daughter's Fight to Unmask a Toxic Legacy." Within hours, it was trending. The article opened with Lorraine's smiling face, pulled from one of her charity gala photos, then slowly unraveled the image into pieces. Fraud, manipulation, emotional abuse, cold-blooded image control, all backed by Lorraine's own handwriting. The backlash was immediate. Julia watched from her motel room as the news crawled across TV screens and flooded her phone. Her old high school classmates began messaging her, not in anger, but disbelief. Some apologized. Others confessed they had sensed something dark behind Lorraine's charm, but never dared speak. Even her extended family, who once silenced Julia at that dinner table, now called in panic asking, "Why didn't you tell us?" Julia didn't answer. She just uploaded a new blog post to her site. "I did try, you just didn't listen. And now, you don't get to pretend you didn't know." And still, her father had said nothing. No calls, no public statement. Julia knew he was waiting, calculating. But she was done waiting for him to do the right thing. She was only getting started. Julia's plan had been precise, but she hadn't expected how fast the fire would spread. Within a week of the article's release, the town of Hollingsworth was in chaos. News vans parked outside the Cooper home. Reporters camped near City Hall. Former donors to Lorraine's charity demanded audits. The church where Lorraine had hosted tea parties every Sunday removed her plaque from their wall of honor. The phrase "toxic parents in disguise" began trending locally. People started digging into their own stories about Lorraine. The passive-aggressive comments, the guilt-tripping tactics, the way she'd shame young mothers at events. Julia watched it unfold like a house of cards crumbling in slow motion, piece by piece, exactly as she intended. But the most satisfying moment came when her father, Gerald Cooper, finally spoke. He held a press conference in front of City Hall, flanked by his lawyer, trying to maintain control. "My wife was a complicated woman," he said carefully. "But let us remember her for the good she did. These allegations, while shocking, are still being verified." Allegations? Julia nearly laughed watching it from her laptop. She had documents, recordings, quotes in Lorraine's own handwriting. Still, Gerald was playing the long game, denying nothing, but admitting nothing either. So Julia decided to push harder. She leaked audio clips next. In one, Lorraine could be heard berating Julia for crying after a school play. "Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a daughter who can't hold it together for 15 minutes? No wonder people pity us." Another clip captured Lorraine mocking one of the charity's cancer patients at a private luncheon. "If she wore less makeup and more humility, maybe I'd actually believe her story." The public turned, harshly. More headlines followed. From angel to abuser, the Lorraine Cooper files grow darker. City councilman silent as daughter's evidence mounts. Local family empire crumbles in real time. Gerald began missing council meetings. Protesters gathered outside his office holding signs that read, "Truth over image," and "Your silence is guilt." Still, he refused to step down. Then Julia pulled her final card for this phase. She contacted the state attorney general's office, forwarding financial evidence from the diary and requesting a formal investigation into the charity's funds and possible tax fraud. She didn't do it anonymously this time. She signed her name at the bottom. 2 days later, the news broke. State launches criminal probe into Cooper family finances. Julia's inbox flooded with interview requests. Her face, once hidden, was now everywhere, framed not as a traitor daughter, but a whistleblower, a survivor, a young woman brave enough to expose the darker side of so-called model families. And still, through all of this, her father never once called. No denial, no apology, just silence and lawyers. But Julia no longer needed his words. His empire was collapsing without her ever stepping back into that house. The same house where she had once been told, "No one will ever believe you if you speak." Now, everyone was listening, watching Julia turn years of pain into pure justice, Satisfying, right? If you've ever wanted to see toxic parents fall by their own lies, this is just the beginning. Tell us in the comments, what would you do with a diary like that? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The town was boiling. Julia could feel it in every headline, every hushed conversation at the cafe, every post in the town's online forums. But nothing compared to the growing storm behind the walls of City Hall and inside her father's house. For weeks, Gerald Cooper had kept quiet, but behind the scenes, he was scrambling. Julia had reliable sources, former staffers, a retired council assistant, who fed her information out of disgust. One sent her a photo of a secret late-night meeting in Gerald's private office, with 2 lawyers and a public relations fixer. Another forwarded an internal memo from the city council urging Gerald to take a temporary leave of absence for the good of the community. He wasn't just losing favor, he was losing power. And still, he hadn't spoken a single word to her. Not one message, not one call. But Julia wasn't waiting on reconciliation. She was preparing for war. Because the real bombshell hadn't dropped yet. A set of hidden bank statements Julia had discovered in her mother's old USB drive, tucked inside a fake lipstick tube in her dresser. They revealed multiple offshore accounts, tied directly to Lorraine and Gerald. These accounts had received over $350,000 from donations that had vanished from the charity's ledgers. The scandal wasn't just personal anymore. It was criminal. And Julia knew the time had come to make the truth undeniable, not just in whispers or articles, but face to face. She planned it carefully, a public community forum being held at the Hollingsworth Civic Center. Gerald had announced that he would be speaking there to address recent attacks on his family's legacy. The room would be packed, local news, neighbors, council members, all waiting to hear him defend the fantasy one last time. Julia would be in the front row. She wasn't going to yell. She wasn't going to throw anything. She was going to confront him with facts. Calm, calculated, lethal. She printed copies of the offshore records. She highlighted the diary excerpt where Lorraine bragged about her husband looking the other way as she skimmed donations. She rehearsed her statement in the mirror until her voice didn't shake. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about setting the story straight, in front of everyone who once doubted her. In the days leading up to the forum, she received messages from people she'd never spoken to, other daughters, sons, even a teacher who had always suspected Lorraine's perfect image was a front. They thanked her, encouraged her. But the most surprising message came from Aunt Denise, the same woman who had once told Julia to stay quiet, who had called her ungrateful at the funeral dinner, now sent a single text. "I was wrong. I see it now. I'm sorry. Be brave." Julia stared at the message for a long time. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The next time they would meet, it would be in the same room where the town had once honored her mother with plaques and speeches. But this time, the truth would speak louder than the lies. And this time, Julia wouldn't be alone. She'd be standing with every child silenced by a toxic parent who hid behind smiles and status. The Hollingsworth Civic Center buzzed with low, uneasy chatter. Every seat was filled. Cameras were positioned along the side aisles. Microphones were clipped to the long, city-branded table where Gerald Cooper sat, flanked by 2 legal advisors and the mayor. He adjusted his tie with practiced ease, the same tie he wore when he accepted Father of the Year 8 years ago. Julia sat in the front row, a manila folder on her lap and steel in her spine. The moderator called the room to order. Gerald leaned forward, cleared his throat, and delivered what sounded more like a campaign speech than a defense. "My late wife devoted her life to this community. She raised our daughter with values, with love. And while certain materials have recently been misinterpreted, I ask this town to remember who Lorraine was at her core, a woman who gave everything for others." A soft murmur rippled through the room. Not quite approval, not quite doubt. Julia stood. Every eye turned to her. Gerald froze. "Mr. Cooper," she said clearly, "not Dad. I have a few questions, as a citizen, and as the daughter you raised under lies." There was no interruption, no security rushing in, because the crowd, even the moderator, wanted to hear her. She held up the folder, pulled out one of the financial records. On this page, a transfer of $25,000 was made from Lorraine Cooper's charity account to an offshore holding in Belize. Can you explain that? Gerald opened his mouth, closed it. She continued. In your wife's own diary, she described you as fully aware of where the money went. Do you deny this quote? Or this one? Gerald signs anything I give him, as long as it helps his campaign. A stunned silence fell. No one moved. Julia turned to the room. You all saw the public face, the fundraisers, the speeches, but you didn't see what happened behind closed doors. You didn't hear the way she talked to me. You didn't see the pressure, the manipulation, the fear. She held up a printed photo, her mother's handwriting, highlighted in yellow. A daughter is a tool until she becomes a threat. That's what she wrote about me. That's what they believed. Gasps, shuffling chairs. Someone cursed under their breath. Gerald tried to speak, but the moderator raised a hand. Mr. Cooper, would you like to formally respond? He looked to his lawyers. One whispered something. Gerald leaned into the mic, his voice low. I need more time to review these materials. A few people scoffed. Others shook their heads. Julia didn't say another word. She simply handed the folder to the moderator. These documents are yours now. The people deserve to know the truth. She walked out to a standing ovation. Not thunderous, but full of something more powerful, recognition. For the first time in her life, Julia wasn't someone's pawn, someone's daughter, someone's shadow. She was the voice that broke the silence. Behind her, Gerald sat slumped, jaw clenched, cameras still rolling. The man who once ruled the room with a handshake and a grin was now the face of a collapsing legacy, and there was no image left to hide behind. Gerald Cooper resigned from the city council 10 days later. No fanfare, no speech, just a quietly submitted letter and a half-hearted press release citing health concerns and unnecessary public distractions. But it was too late. The damage had been done, not by tabloids or rivals, but by his own daughter's relentless truth. Julia watched the news coverage from a quiet cafe 2 towns over. Her coffee had gone cold, but she didn't care. Across the screen was the man who had once ruled their family with passive silence, now forced to step down in shame, a symbol of a perfect legacy torn apart by its own rot. State investigators launched a formal inquiry into the Cooper Foundation's finances. Lorraine's name was stripped from all official charity partnerships. Her awards, her honorary plaque at the Children's Hospital, all removed or under review. Donations plummeted. The illusion shattered. But the moment that stayed with Julia most wasn't the headlines or the public apology from the mayor. It was a voicemail, a clipped, breathy recording left on her burner phone at 2:12 a.m. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything. Your mother would be sick if she saw what you've done. No name. But Julia didn't need one. She recognized her father's voice. She didn't reply. She didn't save it. She just deleted it. As easily as she had deleted every false version of herself her family had tried to force on her. For the first time in her life, Julia didn't flinch. Because what she had destroyed wasn't real. The everything her father mourned was built on lies, control, and image worship. And what Julia had rebuilt was hers. She moved out of Hollingsworth permanently, breaking the final chain that tied her to the town. No more daughter of. No more polite nods at church. No more Sunday brunches with people who once praised her mother while ignoring Julia's silent pain. She rented a modest apartment in Oregon, quiet, clean, and far from memory-soaked streets. She adopted a rescue cat named Paige. She changed her number, closed the burner accounts, and finally, took a breath that didn't feel borrowed. The diary? It now sat in a sealed case in her desk drawer, not as a burden, but a reminder. A record of survival. A weapon once used, now put to rest. She no longer needed it to speak for her, because she had found her own voice. The last time she spoke about her father publicly was during an interview for a podcast about emotional abuse and family manipulation. The host asked her, "What would you say if he ever reached out, if he wanted to make things right?" Julia didn't hesitate. "I'd say thank you for confirming that I was never crazy, never too sensitive, never wrong for feeling what I felt. But I'd also say goodbye. Because some truths don't need a reunion, they just need to be told." That episode went viral. Julia didn't care about the numbers, but in her inbox, dozens, then hundreds, of messages came in. Daughters, sons, people who had lived behind perfect curtains, silenced by toxic parents who smiled in public and destroyed in private. They called her brave. Some called her a hero. But Julia never saw herself that way. She was just a girl who stopped pretending, a woman who chose truth over tradition. And in doing so, she buried not just a mother's fake legacy, but an entire lie the world had been too polite to question. Julia no longer lived by the calendar her parents set. No more galas, no more charity events, no more anniversary dinners where she had to pretend to be grateful. Now, her life moved to a quieter rhythm, one she chose. Mornings began with sunlight streaming through her kitchen window, a fresh mug of tea, and Paige curled beside her on the windowsill. She had enrolled in an online psychology program, focusing on trauma and family systems. Not because she wanted to fix others, but because she finally wanted to understand herself. For so long, Julia had believed that family meant endurance, silence, staying, even when it hurt. But now, she knew the truth. Family doesn't excuse cruelty. And love that demands your silence isn't love, it's control. In a small online forum for adult children of toxic parents, Julia began sharing bits of her story. Not the names, not the scandals, but the patterns, the red flags, the years of gaslighting that made her question her own memories. And people responded, hundreds of them. One message read, "I thought I was the only one. Your words helped me leave. Thank you for reminding me I deserve better." Julia cried when she read it. Not from sadness, but from the strange, quiet joy of knowing that her pain had become someone else's roadmap to freedom. That, maybe, was the greatest revenge of all. Not destruction, but transformation. One autumn afternoon, she visited a bookstore near her new apartment. Tucked in the back was a handwritten sign that read, "Tell your story." The store hosted monthly readings where survivors of trauma shared essays, poems, or even letters they never sent. Julia signed up. When her turn came, she stepped up, heart pounding. The room was quiet. She read a piece she titled, "To the Daughter I Used to Be." It wasn't bitter. It wasn't even angry. It was raw, honest, and full of hope. A letter of goodbye, not to her parents, but to the girl who once begged for their approval. She ended with this line, "I thought revenge meant making them hurt like they hurt me. But it turns out, the real revenge is becoming someone they can no longer break." The room applauded. A few people cried. But more than that, people understood. Julia left the store that night with a smile she didn't have to fake. The streets were cold, but she felt warm. She didn't know what would come next. A degree, a book, maybe a foundation of her own one day. But for now, it was enough to know this. She had reclaimed her life from the people who tried to erase her. She had spoken the truth that generations were taught to bury. She had stood up, not as the perfect daughter, but as her whole self. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply living in peace.